Today's chat is brought to you by the support of all our Twitch subscribers. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through the Twitch platform, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a subscriber of the FFC and gaining access to some exclusive features over in the Discord server, please be sure to visit our Twitch account and click on the subscribe button. If you're an Amazon Prime member, remember that you do have a free subscription to Twitch every month that can be used for this. And for those of you who are already subscribers, thank you again for your generosity.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat. Explore together.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat, recorded live on February 28th, 2020 over on twitch.tv/FocusFireChat as we continue our discussion over the lore book Revelation. This particular episode will serve as what we have come to call the advanced session of the week's exploration. Congratulations to those who signed up for a deeper dive. Before we go any further, however, let's run through a quick introduction of who all we have with us on the show. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86.
And this is a wayfaring witness, a reluctant heir, a broken promise made true, a husk to fill a throne of sustenance, a share to prune the vine, a warden to vacancy, a mind elated and crestfallen, a sojourner of meaning and ever-seeking, green-eyed music lover.
And last but definitely not least, in the hot seat guest co-host, we have our good friend ChattingMyth, or as we call him, Josh. Josh, how are you doing? I don't have any titles to give you, so
I was really trying not to write in it, but I'm doing fine. Green's just gonna recite all the lore from now on.
It's okay. Okay, that is literally from. I am not trying to seduce anyone, Black Flag. You take that back. That is from today's lore drop. Thank you very much. That is all accolades to Osiris. I don't know why he has that many accolades.
He's awarded to vacancy.
He's a madman.
By the way, the warden to vacancy thing definitely made me think of Toland.
Toland? I was thinking Varix.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I was kind of seeing that as connections to like everything that has happened. Like, you know, the husk to fill a throne of sustenance is the Taken King. Shear to prune the vine is the Vex offensive. Warden to vacancy is the whole Varix. Like the different stuff. He's a chicken until he decides to wear something else. Oh my god, that Twitter thread of you, Green.
Of Zavathun? Zavathun? Or what?
We're going to make Blue a cape of chicken feathers. I'm like, what did I just walk into on Twitter?
Blue is going to... It started with Elaine. Or didn't it start with Elaine?
I think that was who someone said it. And I was just like, or Orchid did it.
Orchid did it.
I was like, I opened Twitter and I was like, nope, just closed it again. It's like, I don't even know what's going on.
Orchid and I are basically going to try to make Blue a Osiris cosplay, where we're basically going to take a bunch of pigeon feathers that we find. That's going to be Saint 14, like, tie-in to it. Pin it to, like, this really raggedy jacket / robe, and just make him wear it at Guardian Con and call it his cosplay. It's going to be fine. It's gonna be fine.
Oh my gosh! That was one of the highlights of my Twitter experience today. I was just like, "What? Oh, I'm so confused." Pictures, please.
Absolutely. If I can make this happen, I will make sure he wears it at least for 30 seconds so I can get some photos.
Osiris hunts down all of Saint's pigeons for his feather costume.
That's what I was saying. Although the feathers aren't quite the same.
Oh my gosh. Well,
we know how the emus finally went extinct in Australia. Blue stole all those feathers.
Stole all their feathers. You're welcome, Australia. You're welcome. Enough with our chatter. I know everyone's looking forward to diving into this particular discussion, so let's get right to it. Green, before I forget, I'm going to reference what I said for you to help me remember between the recordings. I I found in the collector's edition the piece that made me think of the PQZ as a file type, not a location. There was a call out in the first entry where Kwong says, that she doesn't understand the extra spatial activity we detected, or the Clovis Bray scientists who speak of transmissions that propagate through the Calabi Yau 6 space. And then the Calabi Yau 6 space is connected to the string theory in that it's a conjectured into a 6-dimensional manifold and leads to the idea of what's referred to as mirror symmetry. And a mirror symmetry is a relationship of a particular example of what physicists call duality. And in
it's
general,
essentially something happens in one place, the same thing happens the other place.
Right.
There's no time lapse to get there. It's not like a telephone call. It's immediate interaction.
Correct.
Or not
so
interaction.
Two theories of
reflection.
mathematically different descriptions of the same phenomena in a non-trivial fashion. So that's why when I was reading the Revelation entry, I had already, we had read the collector's edition. So then I was reading the Revelation entry when I saw the whole thing of oh, hey, ambit on the PQZ. I was like, okay, this is the connection to the signal that they got that was extra spatial. That's where my brain was connecting it to the 3-dimensional fractal image, is because I'm like, oh, they're trying to track what's going on with this signal that's extra, or what is it, extra spatial, and it's phasing through, or was it doesn't bounce through phases or something like that. It's like they're tracking this whole thing and trying to figure out where it's going, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So that was off the top of my head. That was before I forgot that. Another term that I want to make sure I get out there before I forget is sati. Sati was a comment that we made with connection to Commander Kwong. And Commander Kwong, so again, Collector's Edition Journal, man, this thing is chock full of really cool trivia. But sati is explained as that which allows awareness of the full range and extent of the dhammas. Sati is an awareness of things in relation to things, and hence an awareness of their relative value. Sati is what causes the practitioner of yoga to remember that any feeling they may experience exists in relation to a whole variety or world of feelings that may be skillful or unskillful, with faults or faultless, relatively inferior or refined, dark or pure. Narrowed, or to kind of boil that down, it's basically how to act correctly in the great human context, not in the narrow particularities of a situation. And sati analysis was something that Commander Kwong was well versed in, because she was, as we kind of said in the first episode, she was a student of the House of Wisdom. And she says, the House of Wisdom excels at mathematics and logic. Islam gave us algebra, and even our digits are Arabic. That's why the Shura certified commanders are the finest pilots in the solar system. But zero belongs to the Buddhists. This is why you must expect nothing, Quan Zhuan, and so be prepared for anything. And that's going back to the opening line in the journal, is expect nothing and you will be prepared for anything. So we had the Zen Shura training of Ishmael in the last episode, or the last topic. This episode, or in this topic, we're going to be talking through the eyes of a graduate of what's referred to as Sukabo, which is, I had that, hang on, I had it written down. It's basically the college quote, if you want to refer to it, that she graduated from. And so she is a student of sati analysis. And throughout the journal, she has continuous comments about meditation to Tara, who is the figure in, I think is it Buddhism? I want to say, we just had a chat in our live chat here about it.
Yes,
yeah, it's so
that's
Buddhist.
That's what Guru said.
Tara is the figure that is ascribed to being the mother of Buddha. Let me see. Tara is commonly thought to be a Buddha of compassion and action, a protector who comes to the aid of her followers to relieve them of physical, emotional, and spiritual suffering. The journal in particular refers to what's the green Tara, who is associated with enlightened activity and abundance. So there's this journal. Seth knocked it out of the park in my mind. And it goes along with, if you read this in tandem with Revelation, it actually follows, and you can see, similar to the way that you see the deterioration of the psyche of the characters within the lore book, you can see the deterioration of Commander Kwong inside her own journal as you go through the journal and as you read different things. This is also where we actually get the call out that Korosek, which is the reference to David and Kraken Mar. Korosek is actually not a name; it's actually a thing. So it's an interesting. There's just so many little interesting trivia connections that I could spend hours and hours on going through. But yes, so I don't know which one of the many question theories we want to go into. I know I have listed on the mind map some stuff there. I know. So before we get too far, I did have a quote from Seth about the Collector's Editions journal and its connections to the K1 team. And then there was also the comment that I had stated earlier last week about his view on the Golden Age. Do you mind if I say that real quick, and then I'll step out of the way and let Green go?
I mean, let Green and Josh go, namely
sure.
Josh.
Namely Josh. All right. So Seth put a thread out on Twitter a while back about the Collector's Edition journal, and he said the viewpoint character of the Shadowkeep Collector's Edition journal is a Chinese woman trained by Muslims and Tibetan Buddhists. I was interested in the idea that religion would not vanish in the future, but instead become part of honing and growing the minds for all kinds of work. Obviously, this is the Golden Age, so we want to see that things are better, that humanity has grown more human, that the fundamental assumptions people carry are more hopeful, less cynical. Sukabo and the House of Wisdom are two parts of that. The idea of the North America double eagle empire as a voluntary retro-naturalist state where everybody gets together to build rockets, wave flags, and have gigantic air shows is another. Heavy inspiration from Ada Palmer. Imagine the NAE as the actualized version of the feeling you get when watching the launch sequence of Apollo 13, or possibly Top Gun, minus the actual need to go and kill people, aside from Goose, I mean. The utopianism, obviously. I love Seth. Seth just he can't hold
no
it.
Chill when it comes to the comedy characters. Just saying. No chill. So serious.
Utopianism obviously does not stop with North America, and I hope from the first tweet of this thread it's very clear how the implied rivalry between the Shura and Sati command techniques had to be toned down a little for fear of sounding like actual religious strife, which I guess is a reflection of how the problems of today constrain our ability to depict utopia. And then he further went on to say that I think it would be very easy to default to a cynical the golden age of a time of prosperity and growth, but with an ugly underbelly and no genuine social change approach. And I'd like to set down some stakes against that. So he's actually, his entire point is he's actually pushing back against this whole, it was just that golden, it was just that fool's gold veneer, and underneath it was actually this corrupt, monster. And he's like, no, actually the golden age was a golden age. Like, it was actually good. And you saw that with Kraken Mare, with the reference of like violence has not existed on Kraken Mare, even though they are in like complete conflict with all this stuff, with the different governments, with Clovis Bray, with Ishtar Academy, all this stuff. Violence has not been a part of their life for 50 years at that time. I mean, that's a huge thing. And so that's what I kind of wanted to there. But I will let Josh and Green take it away.
All right, Josh, I want to go into not necessarily basic things of what's going on in the book, but kind of if you have any breakdowns, literary breakdowns, concepts that you want to bring up. I know that Blue will definitely have ideas to share as well, especially when we get into the psychology aspects of it. But is there anything literary that really stands out to you that you want to call out before we start diving in, like, card by card?
So, I mean, first things first, and this could be because it's been in my head recently, having recently read it.
Mm-hmm.
The artifact and how the artifact interacts with other people seems so much like the King in Yellow, like the yellow sign, and how people in Chambers short stories, when they either read the play The King in Yellow, or they're given the yellow sign, which is supposed to be this cryptic cultic symbol of the King in Yellow, they are falling into madness, or they're having these hallucinations, or they're having these scientific epiphanies that just lead to, tragedy. And that's the artifact. That at least that's how I've read the artifact. On the other side of, I guess, horror and suspense, the whole book is just like a Twilight Zone episode to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially when I get to like, oh man, I have to look back at it again. But the one lore card that's just firewalls, sort of giving us this breakdown, a grim assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I'm just like between that one and Downfall, I'm like, I could imagine what the opening and ending of this episode would be if it was done by Rod Sterling. Like, it's great.
Right.
And it's terrific at the same time.
So I had never actually heard of the King in Yellow. That looks very interesting.
Interesting, yes, that's the word.
I mean,
I want that cover too.
I think that's the 1895. Yeah, 1895 edition.
That's the first edition one. Yeah,
that's cool.
So if you wanted like a breakdown of that, I mean, it is a short story of encounters with this plague that's also called the King in Yellow. And so people who read the play, they go under some sort of psychotic meltdown. And there's a bit of like what the future would be like. I don't exactly remember when this was written. I think it was written in late 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
First published in 1895. Trying to just skim real quick.
Yeah, so when Chambers is writing this, he's also writing sort of a predictive future. And so he's writing with the setting being in like the 1920s, 1930s. I think there's like 10 short stories in total, maybe. The version I have only has 7. But the first 4 are the bulk of sort of that suspense and that horror. 2 of them take place in Paris, 2 of them take place in New York. But they all sort of follow the same line.
Okay, so they basically they discover their version of the aspect, or their artifact, and then you said there's a lot of psychological, not necessarily strain, but changes that come over them, and they make these quote unquote scientific discoveries because of it, or is it just because of the amount of stress that they're put under that they develop those things?
Well, the interesting thing about it is the play The King in Yellow is quoted throughout the 4 short stories, but it's quoted in fragments.
Mm-hmm.
So all that's known of it is that there is at least an Act 1 and an Act 2, and by the time somebody has gotten to Act 2, they have fully succumbed to the seduction of the King in Yellow of the play. And so there's one short story about a man who he finds a way to turn living beings into marble, and he's like sort of totally consumed by this experiment. And the idea is that he learned a chemical mixture from reading The King in Yellow, and it sort of influenced his experiments. Whereas you have the very first story, which is all about paranoia. You have 2 people who read The King in Yellow, and they believe themselves to be like the next emperor of the United States and such like that. And they've written a whole book, yeah, it's really, I've been doing sort of a cosmic horror read for the first time. So I've been going through a lot of H.P. Lovecraft, which, again, this is also kind of H.P. Lovecraft.
This is very H.P. Lovecraft.
When I was getting to, I don't remember what card it is, but the card where the group realizes that there's nobody in the surface.
Mm-hmm. Oh God!
I was like, this is kind of a Mountains of Madness to me.
There's a little bit of like Edgar Allan Poe aspects to this too. Just
all of like this macabre.
Oh my gosh!
Sort of
it's dark.
Literature. Yeah, mm-hmm. It's great. So.
All right, so like if we dive into the cards themselves, going into, we talked a little bit about the first card just being an introduction to the crew and everything kind of going on. I don't know if there was any call out specifically within the first card that would be a really big like surprise to anybody. You mentioned in the introduction episode that how this is kind of the shtick couple, like the two that are kind of silly back and forth a little bit. But I don't think there's anything really to call out on this one. Is there anything you guys want to call out specifically?
For the first one? No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that we see with this is like the introduction of the timestamps at the start, which will be prevalent throughout the rest. So what you have is 4 numbers, a letter, 3 numbers, a $, LUN dash number dot number. That format is consistent through. It's a header on the different records. I still haven't cracked the first portion of it. It does seem that the last 3 digits are connected to the letter, because every time those digits hit 999, the letter goes up and then that number resets, but I don't know what the first 4 digits are connected to. First, I thought it was hours and minutes, but that doesn't make any sense because it just doesn't work that way. But
Blue has been kind of working on this for
this
over
has been
3
like
weeks.
Oh my God, my brain nearly broke on this thing. So the $LUN is obviously as an indicator of Luna. There is an actual Luna Standard Time project that is out there, and it's actually really fascinating. I'll probably link that in the show notes. I don't think it's relevant to this because they have that was a rabbit hole that I went down, and it was very painful. Very interesting, but very painful because there was a lot of math. But the number, that is the year and days. So you'll see that number never goes above 365. And actually the number right now, so like in moon mining, this is the 24th day, basically. Okay. You'll see that there is one entry that doesn't follow the pattern of going upwards, and I'm not sure why. I haven't quite cracked that one, but like the headers are it's just really interesting on this part. Like the record is right there. This is the identities. This is where we get the names of all the people. So in the intro session, we had mentioned there were some people that were named but didn't actually really seem to speak. This is where that information comes from. You have the location, which is really helpful because you get to see the different lost sectors and stuff like that. That was really cool. Threat detect is always high. It doesn't drop.
That was the one that I kind of wanted your input on, because at least for moon mining, Green, you're right. There's nothing sort of obvious. Mm-hmm. But there's threat detect, which is either at a level 7 or a level 10.
That's because they're not following protocol, and Firewall doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I took it. Was he was like, no.
Unauthorized cognizance, though. That doesn't necessarily.
Well, that's the whole thing of like the whole. Oh, Clovis Bray has left the building. Let's get to work. Wait, you can't just that's the whole. Don't you see how momentous this is? That's the unauthorized cognizance. They're thinking about stuff that they shouldn't be thinking about,
right?
Which is creepy in and of itself because of reasons.
The fact that that just brings up the whole concept of not fail safe. might as well be failsafe.
Firewall.
Firewall is assigning, is analyzing every aspect of what's going on in this site, and this
Yes.
site specifically is Site 3. Site 3 is Revelation. It is the site where Firewall is kind of housed on the moon by the Red Keep. So this site, this card takes place where all the terrible stuff ends up happening later in the book.
Basically, Ground Zero is.
Yep.
I mean, that's what they refer to. Oh gosh, I just moved away from the tab that had that reference. The Waypoint Zero is K. Yeah, the Revelation.
Yep. So I think the most important part of the first card is all of those call outs there at the top.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of gives us
like,
the format.
The snark. Like, I do like the snark. Okay, Apollo, whatever you say. I told you no nicknames.
It's okay, Rocket Man. So moving on to the Discovery, you get Tannisley. They're at the Dig Site 2, which is the Communion/Command Center. On this one, they're not at Site 3. They're not at Revelation. But the commander's over there, away from the thing, the artifact. They found it. So, any major things called out here, I know we've got a bit to talk about, and a few spin foil theories that I have heard that I would like to clarify. Ready? Let's go, Josh. Do you think that the black sphere that is found is similar to the artifact that we recover for Eris?
Hey, Josh, are you on mute?
Wow.
I'm used to that question. That's like every conference call. But hey, are you on mute?
All right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna backtrack a little bit.
There you go.
As I went on my whole TED talk before. I definitely think that the sphere is similar to what we presented to Eris. And somebody in chat earlier, I know, had spoken about what if the casing for the anomaly that we see in the Crucible map, what if that were to open up and there's nothing inside? That's not a thought that I really want to have right now. That kind of hurts me a little bit. But yeah, totally. Especially with the pattern that we hear later on.
Right. And that's one of the things that I remember when you pick up the artifact for the first time in Shadowkeep. It has a very specific set of frequencies that go through. It's not music, but there's ambient noise that comes through. Now, here's the problem, though, I have with it. The object found in Site 3, that dig site, I mean, we don't necessarily go nearly as far as I'm sure they did, but I mean, it could theoretically be the same thing, but they don't necessarily describe the cathedral-like area we go into when we recover the artifact whenever we get to the end of Shadowkeep. They don't have that same, I guess, gravitas of where they find it from. There's no description of a pyramid ship or anything like that. So that's my counterpoint, that I don't necessarily think it's the exact same thing, but possibly similar. But if that's the case, why are there more than one? Blue? It looks like you've got something for that.
Yeah, so they referenced, so first off, this is 167 days on site. So we actually get a good explanation of the artifact within the collector's edition. She says that it can't be described without diminishing it. It's a black sphere. Nothing could be simpler, and yet it is awesome, unspeakably complex, compactly infinite, full of as many things as it could possibly contain. We cannot spend long near it. Its electromagnetic flux, or the EMF, is too subtle to burn through the field weave in our suits or cause any real harm, but we can't assume it will stay that way. If the field spikes, it could force our nerves to fire, even drive us into seizure. High Tesla magnetic fields do strange things to the mind. So this is also where Tanis makes the comment about what it could do. Let's see. Or no, I think noetic effects is connected to that. So 1,200 meters deep into Site 3, yeah, so it shut off all the technology around it, but it didn't affect, anything on their suits. And so we get, kind of ties into my ideas really are more in connection to noetic effects. But yeah, it's very interesting. They used EM triangulation to find it, to find a lava tube. And then when they,
EMP.
No, an EM triangulation. So I guess an EMP, maybe a pulse. I'm not sure, but they were basically sonic. They used sonic forces or electromagnetic echolocation, basically, to kind of find. They found a lava tube, and they were like, "Oh, that's." I don't think they were looking for the artifact, obviously, but they found this lava tube, and their entire thing was that we're going to explore the moon. And when they broke into the tunnel, then you see in the Discovery, it's like, hey, the boar broke into the tunnel and it just chewed into a pillar and then just shot and just stopped. And so that's where we see the connection within the journal.
Okay.
But yeah, the noetic effects is where I kind of go full bore into psychology mode.
Some sort of EMP. I do think the mention of the electromagnetic pulsing is important here. The fact that it's sending out pulse waves that are on that spectrum will come into effect as we go a little bit further, especially in noetic effects, because I do think that I have a spin foil theory on it as far as the medical side of things, on how that actually works and how they spun it essentially to make it make sense. Do we want to move into noetic effects, moving that story forward a little bit?
Yes.
Very well, Blue.
All right. So first off, like this kind of ties in. Chat's talking about the canary system that Clovis Bray implemented, which was interesting because the canary system did not respond as having threats posed, but the human brains that were there did. They had what's referred to as a neurochemical cascade. So let me get here. I think it's Dr. Bow calls out that, I can't explain the mechanism, but tests show neurochemical cascades increasing in frequency and severity over time. Individuals differ in their expression, but there's a clear trend when examined in the aggregate. Approximately 80% of the K1 crew is suffering similarly. Intrusive thoughts, insomnia, narcolepsy, nightmare, and in the worst cases, as we saw with Helsha-Rel. Okay, so I was incorrect. That's Helsha-Rel, not Helsha-Pel. Hallucinations, auditory, and visual. It's a threat to the project. And the 20% is the response. So Commander Kwong challenges him and it's like, well, what about the 20%? And the response that Dr. Bow gives is those are individuals who have yet to be exposed. And yes, before you ask, I did witness the effect in action. I took the levels on an unexposed technician, Keeling Vance, and re-examined them just after an hour with it. Despite no outward changes of behavior, there was a marked drop in her serotonin and a commensurate rise in cortisol. After a week of work at Site 3, she was requesting sedatives as a sleep aid. Now she wants something stronger, something to knock her out. And so this is where we also get the recommendation by Dr. Bow to restrict direct exposure to 30 minutes per day and to rotate teams between sites with each week to limit proximity, and also to begin planning for attrition. And then that's eventually what will lead to Dr. Bow getting replaced, because then he also makes a comment about he is turning in reports with those recommendations. So, yeah. So basically he gets kicked from the team because of that. However, so when we talk about neurochemical cascades, that's an interesting thing. Neurochemical cascades, and it's also connected to the concept of biochemical cascades. So a biochemical cascade or neurochemical cascade is also known as a signaling cascade or signaling pathway. and is a series of chemical reactions which are initiated by a stimulus, which is referred to as the first messenger, acting on a receptor that is transduced to the cell interior through second messengers, which amplify the initial signal, and ultimately the two effector molecules, resulting in a cell response to the initial stimulus. So each step of the signaling cascade, various controlling factors are involved to regulate cellular action, responding effectively to cues about their changing internal and external environments. So what that's basically saying is that there is a event that occurs, a stressor or a stimulus, and then in response to that stimulus, within regards to neurochemicals, you have something that will fire, and then that thing fires something else, and it's basically a domino effect within your mind on a neurochemical scale. So you'll see this, like seasonal affective disorder is a really easy show of this. Like if you go a long time without sun and then you walk into a really sunny place, you have that immense that usually most people have like immediate feeling of like pleasantness. That's because your body is responding to the stimulus of having sunlight. It's a known effect on human physiology. We actually also got some examples of specific symptoms. So the first one was intrusive thoughts. This is actually something that you see a lot with mental illnesses such as PTSD, schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety. And basically the easiest way to explain the idea of intrusive thoughts is that it is the breakdown of an ability to control one's own thoughts, which is really scary to people, because your mind, your thoughts are something that most people can't fathom not being able to control. Like that's very scary. Go for it.
I don't necessarily, I think it's more common, maybe not to the extent of what the book or the card is saying, but it's more common than people in so much as when they're stressed or have a lot of high stressors in their lives, like money, or where am I going to get food, or am I going to have a house next month? Their minds are going to constantly run, so that they don't have control over their thoughts. Their thoughts are going to constantly go to these stressors instead.
Yes and no. So your mind will automatically, like there is a level to degree which your mind wanders, and that's actually kind of tying into what a lot of people view as what's referred to as primary insomnia, or mental hyperarousal, which I'll talk about just in a second, because that actually connects to the neurotransmitter that deals with intrusive thoughts. This is stuff like so for like PTSD, what would happen a lot of times is like you see this a lot with soldiers who have PTSD. If there's a loud noise, they immediately snap into combat mode without even control. Like this is something that is like, you're talking about mind wandering. This is something that is beyond that. This is your body reacts to a mental or to a stimulus before your brain even realizes what's happening. Your body has already started reacting because it is reliving that stress. It is reliving that trauma. And you have absolutely no control over it. So with like PTSD is the easiest one to explain. You'll see this a lot of times with PTSD individuals who have a firework go off, and they immediately react as if it was a bomb or a military firearm or something like that. Anxiety is often connected with the PTSD effect because of crowds, the sense of being crowded in. So this is like, you're right. That is your mind will always wander. Like that's a standard mental component, I guess, if you want to say. This is like that 100-fold. Like this is to the point where your mind's not just wandering, your body's actually reacting to things before you even realize. It's habitual reactions that you don't have any control over at all. And it's like, this is when people get hurt because of someone reacting to a stimulus without even realizing it. So what we also see is recently this has actually been linked to a neurotransmitter known as GABA. We refer to it as GABA because its name is gamma aminobutyric acid, and so GABA is a lot easier to say. And this is actually the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. So basically what GABA does is based on the levels of GABA in a section of the location of your brain called the hippocampus, which is involved with memory, with regards to intrusive thoughts, based on the levels of GABA that is present, an individual's ability to block retrieval processes and prevent thoughts or memories from returning actually varies. So with regards to schizophrenia, with regards to PTSD, depending on that level of the GABA that's present, you have a higher chance of having these flashbacks or having these splits in breaks of reality, which actually ties into insomnia. Insomnia is also connected to your GABA levels. And this is specifically responsive to what's referred to as primary insomnia. There's a different form called secondary insomnia, which is not what we're talking about here. Primary insomnia is insomnia that is unrelated to another health issue or medication. That's secondary. Secondary is related to health issues and medications. This is just insomnia in general. So if you have low levels of GABA, that will often result in what's called a state of mental hyperarousal, where even if your body is exhausted, your mind remains alert and is completely unable to shut down. So that's where there's kind of a connection there too. On the flip side, we have narcolepsy, and that's kind of an interesting symptom that was labeled side by side. Narcolepsy is basically, it's primarily thought to be related to the levels of what's referred to as hypocretin or orexin. It's a neurotransmitter. And the common theory currently about that is that the lower level of hypocretin in the is due to the body's immune system actually mistakenly attacking parts of your brain which produce that neurotransmitter. So your body is basically sabotaging itself, and then that can't produce the relevant levels of hypocretin, and so then it doesn't have the ability to counteract the GABA levels, which then it's just like, so your GABA levels get too high and then your brain shuts down. And that's narcolepsy. Like that's literally what's happening, is the GABA levels are not able to be counteracted by the hypocretin, and it shuts down. Then you have nightmares. Everyone kind of understands nightmares. Defined, the Harvard Neuroscience Institute has gone on record saying that dreams are understood to be recent autobiographical episodes that become woven with past memories to create a new memory that can be referenced later. However, nightmares are simply dreams that cause a strong but unpleasant emotional response. They can arise from a number of reasons. So you have stress, anxiety, irregular sleep, medications, mental health disorders. But perhaps the most studied case is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
Wait.
What's
So
up?
you're telling me that a dream about me flying with a bear in a tutu is based off of memories?
It is autobiographical episode. So it depends on what theory you follow with dreams. This is why I can't stand dream theory. A lot of times the very common thought process is that it's basically your brain purging unneeded information. So it's not so much that it's a memory, it's that there are segments. It's basically like a defrag process of your brain.
So I have to witness the process again in order to get rid of it. Or I have to witness
basically
the bear
it's the
tutu
side effect. It's
flying.
The side effect of your brain freeing up space, because it's basically like, oh, I don't need to know about that, and oh, there's a bear. Get rid of that, because who doesn't want to get rid of bears? And get rid of the fly. I mean, it's basically that's a really common theory. I mean, currently, previous theories you have like psychoanalytical theories where there's everything has a reason, or everything has a symbol on it. You can go down a pretty deep rabbit hole with those. You have people who claim visions in dreams, where that's a communication, depending on your religious or spiritual feelings. That's some ways that sometimes entities from beyond can communicate. Waking dreams are referred to as visions as well. some people say dreams are hallucinations that just occur when you're in REM. You know, it really, the gamut of theories is very wide when it comes to what a dream is. And so what they're basically doing here is they're saying that you have autobiographical episodes, so information that you've seen, and that become woven with past memories to create a new memory that can be referenced later. Which, I mean, if you think about it, that really is what is happening. You're taking information that's in your brain already, you're taking another idea, and you're weaving it together in this really weird thing and creating a new memory that can be referenced later. Doesn't have to make sense, which is like, that's the thing. Like, I don't know. I, as an individual, don't remember dreams, so to me, it's like, okay, whatever. I'm not gonna say I don't dream, but I don't remember any of them. So,
I envy you.
It's always been that way for me. So, like, it's like, I know everyone's like, because that was a big part of one of our classes was the dream analysis history. It's fascinating. Like, it's interesting. But to me, it was like, I can't connect with this because I'm like, they're like, well, what do you dream about? I'm like, I don't know. I'm sure I dream, but I have no idea. Like, I turn off and I turn back on in the morning. That's how I remember. It's like, that's how it's always been for me. There was actually a drug back in 2003 that was noted as actually being helpful in relieving nightmares that were connected to PTSD. And PTSD, like I was saying, PTSD is the very, very very heavily studied cause or case of nightmares, mostly because severe nightmares, you also have like things called night terrors and, you know, all this stuff. PTSD is obviously one of the big causes. Like, you can tell there's a very clear correlation between those two. The drug prazosin was reviewed in 2003, and it was noted as being somewhat helpful. Prazosin's interesting though, because it's traditionally used to address hypertension, but there was a connection in the use of prazosin with the reduction of level of neurochemicals in pathways that the PTSD stimulated. So because PTSD stimulates specific synaptic paths, there are chemicals that are stored in those pathways that get fired, which then cause nightmares. And so this drug just basically helped clean out those pathways so that when they got stimulated, there wasn't that collateral damage effectively. So the last one that we saw mentioned was the hallucinations, which are really important because we kind of get a concept, especially later in the entry, to that. So these are generally linked with dopamine levels, and hallucinations are defined as perceptions in the absence of external stimulus and are accompanied by a compelling sense of their reality. So they don't exist, but our brains are convinced that they do exist. So the question here is, how is this item causing all of this in our characters? Like, what is going on here? We had a reference there of what was referred to as high Tesla magnetic fields. So you can actually do this to yourself today. Like, if you go and listen to I think it's ASMR, certain individuals will have very notable reactions to those auditory events. You can do this with like meditation music and, you know, all these different, like, you know, study music is a big thing to kind of drive that neurochemical level or the brain reaction to those things. That's kind of what's happening here, is because they're exposed to these EMP levels or EMF levels within the artifact, it's actually changing your neurochemical structure of the brain. And the thing is here is that it's doing it to everybody who is being exposed. So like when was it Keeling Vance, no exposure at all. Dr. Bo puts the technician in the room with the artifact, and after an hour, there is a drop in serotonin and a noticeable rise in cortisol. So there's a stimulus, and the only change in the environment was the exposure to the artifact. So, you know, there's the correlation there. And then after a week, she is already unable to sleep because of the neurochemical cascade that the stimulus is causing. Again, the neurochemical cascade is when You're introduced to a stimulus, something fires, and then something fires because of that, and it's the domino effect within there.
So
And this is happening to everybody who's exposed to it.
Can I ask a question real quick? So when it comes to that neurochemical cascade, since somebody is exposed to it once, you have a very mild effect that could theoretically go away. But is it similar to like a concussion where if you have continued exposure
Yes.
or continued trauma, it becomes more permanent with it and thus becoming more and more pronounced
Yes.
in the side effects?
Yeah, and that's actually what we see as the entries for both the lore book and within the collector's edition journal go forward. That's actually exactly what we see. And that ties back to, again, the aggressiveness that we see with Rasputin's shutting down New Pacific. Because, again, if this is all based off the data of the communication that's being received, you're talking about basically the equivalent of a neuroplague. It's something that is, once it's released into a general population, if this would do this, I mean, there's human biology. There's a reason that insomnia is such a big deal. Humans have to have sleep. It's as annoying as it is, humans need sleep because that is actually a soft reset on your brain's health. If you go extended periods without sleep, you will actually exhibit and eventually go insane. Because your brain can't cool down. Yeah, what's up?
Here's my argument that the data that Rasputin shut down isn't exactly the exact same thing that they're dealing with on here in K1. Nobody is reported in New Pacific as having any of these symptoms. Not the scientists that are dealing with it. Right, but like if they've been studying it and gathering data, wouldn't they have some of those same symptoms come up?
Paranoia?
I don't necessarily...
I mean, Shanice Pell was paranoid that Clovis Bray was coming to... And I mean, I guess the question is it paranoia if it's actually true?
Right.
But the thing is also there was a filtration of they were not interfacing with it through the artifact similar to K1. Now, the argument that I would make to your argument, so my counter argument to your counter argument, is that within K1, we see that not only did they just review the data, they actually went into various levels of extreme exposure to that data.
Right.
Later in the entries, they have things like the deep sensory tanks where they actually will go into that's the fringe where they go into like the water and they are completely absorbed into that data. So they are submersing themselves into data much more than just looking at data on a computer screen, which is kind of how I got the New Pacific. That's what I got from them, is they were looking at it from a deep space probe. So they were like, oh, hey, this is being fed back through a computer to a computer. Like there's a marked filtration process there.
Right. And if that's the case, then is the data itself dangerous?
Yes.
Or is it just the exposure? Well, I mean...
Well, here's the thing. If we're talking about...
There's not a ton of, like, supportive evidence to say that this is the exact same data.
Correct. Yes. I definitely agree with that. What I'm saying is in the effect of if this is the same data, the reason why I would argue that it is very dangerous is, and Black Flag just said this actually in chat, when you talk about neurochemical cascades and neurochemical changes on this level, your humans' brains are amazing. They do amazing things. But the other thing is they are extremely fragile.
Sure.
If you change the chemistry of your brain and you change it to a very good level, I mean, this is depression. Depression is the exact thing that I'm kind of thinking of. Like, you're never, quote unquote, going to get better. Like it's something that your brain is once synaptic pathways are constructed and once they are like burned into existence, those synaptic pathways really don't go away. And that's where neurotransmitters come in, is because they are helping form those pathways. They're helping to form that. Once that pathway,
forging the paths.
Right. And once that path is forged, it's there. Like, it's not. And so, like, if you're talking about something that's actually rewiring your brain on a neurochemical level, it is dangerous because, we see that with Dr. Green and her shit. Josh mentioned the subtle shift in Dr. Green's comments. She goes from being excited of breaking a code to referring to the artifact as her child. Like, and that's in all of their exposure. Like, even in the collector's edition journal, Commander Kwan refers to it also that way. They all take this whole thing and start referring to it as their precious, if you want to go down that route. Because that's where the anger when Clovis Bray comes in, and Clovis Bray's like, hey, we're going to put this in a box. Like, we're not, they didn't even actually, I mean, like they moved it to the location that we see in the Crucible map, but like they didn't actually, quote, take it off the moon. They just put it in a box, and it was like, it was on par with someone kidnapping this team's child, is the response that the K1 crew kind of had to that. So, I mean, the ramifications or the implications of that alone is really insidious, because if that was just the artifact, that's not actually the event that's communicating with them. I mean, if it knows enough to be able to do that, that's extremely dangerous. That's something that's getting into I saw someone, Josh, I think you put it in there. These violent, what is it?
Oh, these violent delights have
violent ends. Yeah. I mean, that's the end level that I'm thinking, is like, everyone thinks that they're doing the thing of free will, but it's actually not free will. It's because you have been changed in a way that you don't even realize that you have been changed. I mean, that's the danger of mental illness. I mean, that's why it's such a big deal, and why it's something that is so important to keep an eye on.
So we have a very thorough explanation of the psychological effects that are going on in Noentix.
To be fair, I warned everybody.
I know you did, and I typed in the private chat with Josh. It's just like, when it comes to psychology, I just let Blue go to his happy place, because that's where he loves to be. And so, Josh, did you have anything specifically on the literary aspect for Noentix before we move on to Deep Space Signal and the theories that go into that one?
Nope, not really. We could head over to the next one.
All right. I'm going to let you start Deep Space Signal and anything that you had with that, because there were some interesting things that popped up that we kind of mentioned in the introduction episode. So,
I mean, we talked about the PQZ, which is a new phenomenon to me. I think we get a lot of probably the writers having some fun with us with, like, the sweet nightmare milk.
Mm-hmm. Best line in the book.
But then we also get, we actually get the signal, and we get the, and I'm thinking of not unveiling the other one that came out during Season of the Undying, the one that spoke about the Vex aspects,
and
how they're interpreting a pattern that is presumably being given off by the Darkness for the Soul divisive. So that's, that was sort of what was in my mind, and that these two are really just the observers. They're probably the ones that are behind a computer screen, just monitoring this thing day in, day out, and just watching sort of the signal flows. And in some ways, and I know that's not true because of the previous card, but in some ways they also seem like they're the ones who notice some of the changes and some of the, I guess, possible or potential dangers that are happening without seeing it happen to an individual. Because the pattern could be anything. So them seeing that the pattern is shifted and that the pattern is possibly coming from outside the solar system and stuff like that, that's a sign for them, So that's really what I'm like picking up.
Blue, in the intro episode, you had mentioned the aspect of intertwined physics, or the duality of the possibility of the way these guys are communicating. If that's the case, why is there an echo?
Though there's not an echo, is the argument.
Right, but they're sensing the fact that there's something coming back.
Right, and that's the whole thing, is like, they're like, it's bouncing, so think it's bouncing the signal off something, and they're like, yeah, but this signal doesn't bounce, like...
Right.
And so the logic there is like, okay, if it's not bouncing and it's coming back at us, that means something else is coming. Like, it's something there. Like that was kind of the thing there that I kind of got. And it was it's a new pattern. But then like it was super interesting, but I got old. I'm bored. This is also where you see, hey, you haven't slept, and he calls that out. He says, when our shift's over, I probably won't be able to sleep until 2 hours before I have to get up and do it all over again.
Right.
So yeah, it's a new pattern. So it's not only that it's not an echo, it's not even bouncing. It's a completely new, or not a completely new pattern. It's a slight shift, but it's coming from the same area that the original signal was coming from, but it's different. And so that's where it was kind of like, okay, so there is a communication there. Hang on real quick, because I know there was a reference. So the reference is entry 7 in the journal. It says, Yan and Loftus are making progress on the distant source that communicates with the article. Their models describe the signal as a ripple moving through a six-dimensional manifold present at every point of our familiar 4-dimensional space-time. I almost understand it. But I am too much a creature of motion to attach to space I know. I almost wish they would make less progress than I could afford to go easy on them, but it is clear that a major component of their work is intuitive and driven by proximity to the artifact. I have been pushing their exposure limits because I fear, that is the honest word, Clovis Bray will seize the site soon. And then that drives into Quan's paranoia there. And then goes on to question, what if this object is hostile, even malevolent? Would they tell the world? Would the truth align with their... And that goes into a whole different thing about Clovis Bray censoring data, which we also saw in New Pacific. It's called out... and if you read that in conjunction with the deep space signal, the signal between phasic realities is not something capable of bouncing off anything. So the return of the signal indicated that there was something sending it back. And the image that is on the page is something that is similar to what the PQZ file would. It's a 3D fractal image that's being drawn.
Okay. So after the signal is discovered going back and forth between their location and the deep space site that is not necessarily marked in any way, shape, or form, but just a deep space site, we have the board meeting and the first instances of firewalls scrubbing data or scrubbing the interactions. Yes. Comments, concerns, prayer request about this one. AI are scary, even if it's not failsafe.
Well,
still scary.
So the thing is like all the scrubbing that is being done is actually by the request of Commander Quang. And actually Firewall is like, delete, send to Rasputin. Like, I mean, like it's still sending this data to Rasputin. And that's called out in the last half of this. It's like It's so funny, the argument that basically Firewall and the commander get into. It's like, Firewall, scrub the following records, or following from your records. Firewall, sever connection to Warmind Rasputin. Negative. It's like, it's just so funny. Like, Firewall is like, nope.
It's almost like Cade with the tower computer.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
horse people.
Yeah, horse people. What? But that's really, and so like, so then Warmind Rasputin requests reason for break of contact, and commander is like, well, tell him to talk to Aeronautics of China, sever connection. And Firewall's response is negative. Rasputin will maintain open channel, and so then she just basically is like, all right, whatever, just bring up a map for the critical relays of cross-space transmission, because basically she's convinced that Clovis Bray is bugging the communication that is being sent to and from Earth from the K1 complex. Which, I mean, I mean, whatever. I won't necessarily see that as wrong. The difference here is that because of that paranoia, that's actually why she physically goes back to Earth to report to the board what's going on, or why she says that she's going to go back, because she is accusing Clovis Bray of
meddling.
Basically stealing IP differences.
It is something that they are working with. I mean, don't you think they would want to know what's going on besides the nefarious aspect that Clovis Bray is doing? But
yeah, that's actually what the board's response kind of seemed like to me. Was they're like, well, yeah, Clovis Bray is they're partners in this project. Like, I don't think the board doesn't seem to be like, oh no, they're actually very light about it. They're like, oh, you accuse Clovis Bray of what? Monitoring our communication? Do you think they're listening right now? And it's called out that there's like laughter, you know, and so and then there's also corrupted data here. But then she goes ahead and she says, you know, I'm going to make quarterly reports. Or if we make a discovery of note, I will be there personally, because she doesn't want to communicate over the channel.
That's definite paranoia.
Oh yeah, I mean, yes. And the response that she has to Alton showing up is often like, it's yeah. She this is the point at which even Firewall calls out in the threat detective. He goes, you know, threat detect original was none, all parties level 1 clearance, and then revised detect level 4 psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, you know, again, you know, threat response, record for posterity, revised response, exhibit record 22, file report to Rasputin. So again, it's backing up everything, because at this point it's noticing, Firewall is starting to notice the extended exposure, the extended effects, you know, this we haven't even hit a year on the point of this one. This is day 279.
Right.
So, and remember, this took place over 3 years. So they're already having this level of psychosis, having this level of side effects. And that's just with the people that are there temporarily. Commander Quang never leaves the site, really. Like, she's constantly at the site. She's constantly on the site. So whereas other people are being protected through the cycling of, you know, every week or every thing, she's kind of there. She's not at Revelation. She's at Command Center. Right. But what I mean is, like, whereas there's a cycle of personnel, like, you know, the personnel kind of rotate through. She doesn't rotate through. She is there constantly, and she actually does have a lot of presence within Revelation. She has, whereas Captain Hui actually doesn't, which is an interesting piece. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next card is Mouse, the introduction of Dr. Green, and I read this as primarily a baseline. Yes. For her character, to get a psychological profile of her character kind of in your head, so you see her own psychosis take hold later on. I would agree with that.
Josh, any thoughts or feelings on this guy?
No, yeah, I agree, and it also does the origins of the traveler. Just to sort of give you that little grain that this could be different than what you are already assuming it is, and even if it's not, there might be a bigger backstory to that regardless. So, we've since Shadowkeep, we've had the unveiling, and we've had a lot of discussion on the light and the dark and deep in the sky and all that stuff. And so it at least gives you the little hint that there's a lot more, and maybe this is it could possibly be a neutral party.
Right.
We know it's not, or at least we assume it's not by the end of it, but it at least allows for that discussion to happen in your head when you're reading it.
Mm-hmm. The figure. This is the start of the really, really creepy side. Like, it hasn't already started, but Blue, you want to jump into this one since this is the start of kind of like crazy hallucinations that are going on with it?
Yeah, this is why this is actually the start of why I challenge. Everyone likes jumping on the bandwagon of, oh, it's the Hive that are taking him out. I'm like, is it? Because these entries start talking about hallucinations and figures and things that show up that aren't, and we've seen that in game, and it's not the Hive. Like, the Hive aren't the ones that are jumping through walls and hanging out over our beds while we sleep, because that's not creepy at all.
You know what that sounds like to me? Sleep paralysis.
That's actually what is explained in the card. They are the doctor, I think it's Dr. Henson, calls out that it could be atonia, sleep paralysis, which is atonia while consciousness. And they actually refer to, you just need more GABA. They just need more GABA in your system, which is the insomnia. Your body was in a sleep state while your mind was awake. And so, and that's where this. So Dr. Henson sends some medication to increase the GABA or to help with that level. And then actually the thing is like, but here's the thing, is I don't think the doctor actually thinks that, because upon leaving the chambers, the doctor requests a spectrum-wide scan of the quarters. And, basically it's like, Firewall's like, sure, but I require the commander's consent and relay a permission request. And then the doctor's like, no, probably nothing. So, like, I read that last section as, okay, I don't think the doctor actually thinks this is a hallucination. Like, there's something that they're picking up is going on.
Mm-hmm. Anything else on this one before we move to the visitor?
Well, at least for me, I know since Shadowkeep, the idea is what they are hallucinating, the figures that they're starting to see, that they're basically the shades that we have on the moon today. And for some reason, I just didn't imagine it that way. I don't know.
I don't think they're the same shades, because the shades that we see today are guardians.
Or remnants of, like, the trauma that you see in K1. I mean, think about how some of them yell at you, and some of them are guardians, absolutely, from, like, the battle on Mare Continuum, but some of them are also, they don't necessarily sound like guardians.
Oh, no. I don't think they're guardians. I think they're shades, though, because the other thing is, if you looking at the threat level that's detected, it's jumping from 8 to 9. It's like, okay, possible psychosis, crew impairment, but then it drops to level 5. But the reason why it drops to level 5 is because it's not a psychosis. It's actually possible exotic. So it's basically, it's Firewall. The way I read that was, it was Firewall going, oh, okay, it's probably not their brains are breaking. It's something that is affecting them. It's actually, they're not hallucinating. There's actually something happening, is how I read that, which is why you see a level 5 instead of a level 8 or 9. Now, of course, I don't know how they're ranking the levels. it could be lower numbers are worse, which if we're playing golf, that's a bad thing. But that's how I read that. It was also here that you see Firewall go from the review of psychosis to review of possible exotic threat.
No, and I see what you guys are saying, especially with the ones that we have now. They all have different dialogue. But what I mean is, when I was reading this, and when I guess the image that was coming into my head was, this is literally just, it's just a figure in the back. It is a figure without any apparent stature at all. I mean, I had the idea of the statue that's inside the pyramid ship.
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of the idea I was having. Like, it's literally something that is present, or at least you assume is present, but it doesn't have a form. It doesn't have a discernible
and so
body type.
Real quick, I feel like so entry 9 from the journal actually talks about this, and it says, "Must speak with Hinton about what I saw, a dark visitor." And then it's she writes in a number 19 praise to Tara, which translates into, "She whom gods, titans, and spirits attend can dispel any terrors that come in dark hours. A proof against chaos, her beauty has powers." Tara, whom gods and titans heed, you may dispel any terrors that come in dark hours. You are proof against chaos, your beauty has power. I am not afraid. So she actually
sounds very much like a prayer.
Well, yeah. Well, no, it starts like kind of going into that part, but she does actually see a manifestation. And then quickly following that, she says, entry 10 is, it's just sleep paralysis, a byproduct of overwork. Henson is more pragmatic than Bow, and perhaps more naive, which I'm like, oh, that's not reassuring. And then Sati analysis, am I rationalizing a significant and dangerous event because the local context has blinded me? Unsure. I will find time to meditate on it.
She also scribbles in like a drawing of it,
right? Not on this particular entry, but yes, she does have scribblings on a couple of them. Okay. It's later. Where is it? It's like near the end that she has the dark figure that's really creepy to look at.
Boxing Day. I'm going to let you and Josh take the lead on this one, because this one, I don't feel comfortable with this one.
So the first thing that I wrote, so this is the quote that Janet Green has. She says, "I don't like it, the idea of trapping it like that, alone in the dark, forever crying out, but mama can't hear you." So the first thing I actually thought of was Constellations, with one of those last two cards are, where we get the Traveler sort of talking that it's been screaming until its throat is dry and nobody could hear it. Mm-hmm. That was the first thing I thought of. Then I read it again and I was like, oh, this is scary. Somebody stopped me from reading this.
Mm-hmm. So is this the My Precious Golem effect that's going on with Dr. Green?
It's more
that
than
she's.
That. I think it's.
Like
I mean, yeah, I think
like Rosemary's Baby.
Yes. Like it's. I mean, to put it simply, Green. Yes, that is. But I mean, it's also much more, because this is. So we had, like you had mentioned, Mouse. The entry Mouse was kind of the baseline for Dr. Green. Mm-hmm. Which makes this that much more problematic, because you see with Mouse, Dr. Green was like, oh yeah, hey, there's an artifact and that's cool because we're going to crack the code that, blah, blah, blah. Here, it's all about, I can't stand it. They're going to box it up and they're going to study and poke you, forever crying out, but mama can't hear you. They're moving it away. I might not see it again. I might not see you again. And that's too sad. So I'm just too sad. We'll talk more later. And then there's a minute or 2 minutes of silence, and then what's the point? Which has its own chilling, ramifications in my brain. But
so she's assimilated it into her own child. They're indistinguishable in her mind in some respects.
Right. Which, going back to the data having neurotransmitter or neurochemical cascades, if it's rewriting people to the point that they're establishing connections to this level, that's extremely insidious. And it's, that's, again, if you see this as an evolution of that effect, all of a sudden people are going to be, this innocent thing it's communication, this is what happens with like things that can rewrite things as simple as chemistry. Just adding a chemical to the human brain, you can really mess people up. And that's what you start seeing. And then like within the journal for entry 13, it's the same thing from the commander's point of view, basically. It starts out with Clovis Bray stole it, and it's circled like 3 or 4 times in like heavy hand. There's a drawing of the Clovis Bray icon with it's been X'd out and scratched out. And she says, so he's talking about Alton, and he asked me why we want to keep suffering under its influence, risking unknown noetic effects and massive psychological attrition. He insisted on pathologizing the experience of contact as if every difficult discipline from Buddhism to Contact Bridge doesn't suffer attrition in its learners. His corporation has designed a gruesomely over-engineered containment system to hold the article. It poses more of a danger to us than the artifact ever did. Yet we have no choice but to install it. Then the whole containment system and its suspension will be hauled away from the dig to a permanent Clovis Bray laboratory nearby. My thoughts have become snarled and septic. No more provocation. I must recenter myself. So, I mean, it's the whole thing again. Now, there is a degree of truth here when she comments about the containment unit being dangerous. When you see them talking about what they built the containment unit out of, it is called out that if they misalign something, it would like blow up the moon or something. Like it's like there is significant problems with what they constructed it with. Which also goes to tell you just how much Clovis Bray really wanted to limit exposure to this.
Okay. What about did you move on to Waking Dreams? Some of them are starting to blur together. I'm sorry.
Waking Dreams is
Waking Dreams does have the
that's
whole, you don't want to be in the solar system.
Yeah, that's
right.
That was the David thing that we talked about last episode. You also see the revised threats: confirmed exotic, psychosis dangerous, crew impairment, protocol incompliance.
Right, but David has created this cosmophasic field around the object to generate a convergence point. He can't build it with the material we have, but he's just in his mind has discovered this design because of the orb, because of the artifact.
Yeah, he basically is basically a echo chamber for the artifact at this point, is how I took it.
So, okay. Just gonna throw this out there. It's total just BS mostly. The Traveler itself had a very similar effect on humanity in a more mild sense, in the fact that the Traveler sparked the Golden Age and helped humanity reach its full potential.
I see you're paying attention to chat right now.
Oh, actually, I'm not. I don't have chat pulled up yet.
They're asking. Dancing is talking about the whole speaker visions be connected to K1.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
it's the thing is again, two sides of the same coin, right?
I mean, the darkness and the light being two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. I mean, same communication practice. I mean, it's the thing is like when that was the thing that one of the things that stood out for me at the end of Shadowkeep is the vision that we have at the end of Shadowkeep is very similar to the vision that we get, with the Traveler. It's very similar in the communication style. And so you see here again, we have the instances of, they weren't really, they were kind of, they were speakers, but they weren't the prophetic speakers that we see in current game. But the speakers of the Golden Age were those who had that direct topological connection. They were able to translate thoughts into a topological communication with the traveler and, communicate back and forth. That's what is going on with this artifact. Except this is, I don't mean this as a pun, but this is the darker side of what that means. Because if you're talking telepathy, you're talking direct, connection on a mental level. Well, what else can be done when you're doing that? Like, there's other things that can get transmitted than just information.
Right. But here's the thing, like, the speakers obviously are able to sleep. There's no mention of the speakers having insomnia or anything like that to that extent. But the waking dreams is a thing that they do describe.
But again, so that's what I mean is, like, this is two sides of the same coin.
The dark side, right, the dark side of it.
Dangerous side. I think I agree that it would be darker, but I can also I would more generally say this is the dangerous point of doing like direct brain communication. There was a podcast that just did something similar to this, and I just blanked on it. But it kind of dealt with this kind of concept of like direct, communication via telepathy. Is all it sounds great. It sounds like something everyone wants, but then you all of a sudden realize that if you have that level of communication with everybody around you, that's a degree of transparency that you have to be ready for. And there's a lot more that can get communicated than what you might just think initially. And we're seeing that with this right here, with this neurochemical cascade that's effective or affected by this. And yeah, Dino's saying the same thing. Like I don't think, I don't think that K1 is connected to the speaker. I think that, and just like Dino's saying, it's like this is the same method, is how I kind of took it. I don't think it's the artifact tricking everybody. No, I think that it's literally just saying like this is the same method of communication.
It's just interesting to see the brilliance, that's the sacrifice that you have to have for brilliance with this type of thing. Yeah. And what is the purpose of David's creation?
Well, that's the thin line between genius and insanity.
Right, but that second question, what is the purpose of David's design? Is that hologram still available? Is that design ever been made to fruition? And if so,
I would say yes, the hologram probably is still available because this is all getting sent to Rasputin. I don't know if there's any fruition because, again, he makes a comment about, it would have... I kind of took it as like, if you engage this drive, there's going to be serious ramifications to it. Which that has there's own connection of spinfoil theories with the whole Elixni whirlwind and stuff like that. It just, we can see. I mean, there's a lot of potential connections there that are just at the moment completely potential. But I could see this being ultimately something that gets drawn back into the way that, you have the mention of convergence point. You have the mention of the solar system having, accidental destruction or something like that. Plus, this is something that it will send you very far. I mean, we have previous examples of this exact thing with the Elixni and the whirlwind. And then we had the Elixni crossing the dark spaces between galaxies somehow and arriving in our system. Again, what if that was something that was accidentally brought along? There's a couple connections that you can make with that too, especially with the connection that just got made with the Weblore today and the Maw. Yeah, Dancing just made that, the Maw. I mean, that's where my brain kind of was connecting there.
Josh had made another literary connection back to the King in Yellow. Josh, he just put it in chat. Do you want to jump on that?
Yeah, so sort of what I was saying. So, we have David Pell, he's he's I guess you could say he's getting some dangerous inspiration from the article, enabling him to make this field. And that goes back to what I was saying with the King in Yellow. The second story is called The Mask, and it's about this young scientist who reads the play The King in Yellow, and he starts developing this chemical that allows him to turn living things into marble. And so he starts making his art all over the place. And I think he actually might have started off as an artist, as a sculptor. And he starts experimenting, and first he's making flowers into marble, and he's making rabbits into marble. And then the misfortune that his fiance jumps into the pool, and she herself becomes a marble statue. And he ends up committing suicide just from all the trauma of having seen her be turned to a statue, having sort of come to understand and yet still accepting what he read in the play The King in Yellow. It sort of reminds me all of, with the article and David Powell and all that stuff.
How about we move into classified? I know that the debate with that last card is going to go on and on about the connections in the spin foil for sure. Just saying. I realize this chat. I realize I'm pushing us forward. It is okay.
Yeah, this one, yeah.
Classified. This one's fun. This one is Commander Huang getting a realization from a little bit. I mean, Firewall's kind of snippy back. I mean, Firewall.
I like Firewall.
Firewall. It says that Firewall wants to connect to Rasputin. Commander says nope.
Firewall says yes.
Firewall says why first. Commander responds. Firewall says, why are you asking, or Commander asks, why are you asking about connecting to Rasputin? Classified from Firewall. Classified by whom? And the next one is my favorite one, because if you know the definition of mendacity, that is hilarious. Because AI comm firewall, mendacity, security protocol. Security protocol is what she ties into, but mendacity is it literally means untruthful. It's like, oh my gosh, this AI is just calling you out as this whole thing is just I'm going to curse. This whole thing's bad. Just saying.
It's so fun. This is actually where my appreciation of Firewall kind of took off, was because
I have to agree with that.
It's like, Josh, you might know this one, but liar. It's the lying cat. It's lying cat is what it is. It's just, oh my god.
I mean, I am personally a very sarcastic person in my day-to-day life, and so just reading like those last couple between the Commander and Firewall is just like, oh, and I suppose you want me to have a Clovis Ray technician come in.
Yes.
Maybe even have us do some diagnostics. Affirmative.
Negative.
No, there's no way that this will be happening. Absolutely no way.
Well, the reason why Commander wants to asked about the whole diagnostics and having a technician come is because Firewall has been classifying and having these corrupted files, which I'm corrupted are air quotes right now because I think that is Firewall's way of masking the files from the Commander that Firewall is wanting to send to Rasputin.
I can see that.
I don't know if that's actually the case at this point, but it really seems like that is what it's trying to do. It's trying to reconnect to Rasputin to get the information to him.
Right. And actually, the reason I agree with that is because of what happens later with Captain. Because Firewall's the one that's like, oh, you're going to make a break for it? Okay, I'll help you.
Transmit.
What do I need to do to cover you up? And then also Firewall starts messing with the timestamps. That's another thing.
Any other major things from Classified before we move on?
Other than Firewall's a BAMF.
and the commander's gone bat. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Our Small Steps is the speech about the Exodus Project.
You know, maybe I just totally skipped the identity, but I read One Small Step, I read Pause for Applause, and I'm like, is this Clovis Bray? And I just completely, and God, I need to stop thinking because now my head is hurting. This is, I think if you don't have the journal, I think this is the moment where you fully understand that the commander has gone over. In my opinion.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because
the other thing is like, I know that the Exodus Project was, because this is also where you have like Yang Liwei, chat's talking about this, Yang Liwei and stuff like that, and there's new colony ships that have, and there's a lot of different ways to read it. Like, this could be something where she's like, you're like, what you're saying is like she's lost it, and she's like, yeah, the information that we've invented will help, do this and this and this, and it's announcing a new phase of the project because of our work, like all that. Or you could be, or it could be flip side. It could be, hey, they actually are doing an Exodus project, and this is her practicing.
Well, I mean, look at the threat detect. There's none. This is a speech composition. This is her preparing a speech. This isn't one that may have actually been given. But if this is a genuine feeling and not just her
losing it,
her with this image of grandeur that she has for herself at this point. But if it's a legitimate thing, the blueprints that David came up with, who's to say that there aren't other quote unquote inventions or technologies invented because of this interaction with the artifact that did actually lead to the Exodus project being pushed forward.
You had the call out of other things being invented because there was the mention of ingrammatic matter in one of the, I can't remember if we already crossed over it, but or not, but one of the techs, was in the tank, and she's like, oh, I had something on programmable matter, but I lost it. And I was like, what? Like, and that was, I think it was before, because that was one of the things that like Clovis Bray was like known for, ingrammatic matter. And I was like, did they just acknowledge that there's a possibility that Clovis Bray stole that? Which wouldn't be entirely surprising, but it would be kind of funny at the same time. Yeah, I mean, we know that they were doing the Exodus project, so that's why I actually personally read this as like her being like, they basically have sent them, heads up, we're going to be doing another phase, and we want to see if anyone is interested in going, because, whatever. Because she also mentions, like, today in a message that will be relayed system-wide, Aeronautics of China is announcing a new phase. I can read it both ways, to be fair. I can read it as the delusion of grandeur, or I can read it as an actual practicing.
So we get an explanation in the next card of why a lot of the areas are locked down a bit more tightly in the first disappearance. Though not all of the areas would have remained locked down after this thing has happened, but this is the first disappearance when Dr. Yanoi goes missing and has stolen a suit in the mining area for Site 4, I believe. Airlock B, Site 4, has taken the mining suit, and they are super paranoid that she has taken some technology and ran. So Commander basically says Firewall, lock down everything, and Firewall does that, and you see the fact that the commander has been expecting something like this because they think that
I think that's the captain calls that out. He's like, whoa. What just happened?
Right.
For a long time now. Okay. Security plan Delta.
Is there anything else based off of this one that you're like,
I would say that this is the splitting point for the commander and the captain.
Absolutely. Commander has lost it. Captain is like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
There were two things that I noticed. One, so she's singing. Not that singing is anything other than creepy. I'm sort of, if you've seen The Haunting of Hill House, I'm picturing when Nell is sort of just dancing through the mansion.
No.
That's what I was picturing the whole time. And I'm like, oh, no. But the second thing is that she's
I'm on
she's
the moon.
Singing.
It's made of cheese.
Yep, that's what I thought exactly, Dino. She's singing the moon song that Shaq sang to us, that Air sang to him.
She's singing, and she's singing in a language that Firewall can't recognize.
Correct.
And I'm trying to figure out what could that language possibly be.
It would have to...
Totally.
Not that we've been giving context. Well, I was actually... God damn it. I was actually going to say... whatever language Dredgen Yor is derived from. The name. Because the name is sort of this lost language that very few apparently know. Yeah, see? Dancing Guru, same thing. You know, that was sort of the first thing to pop into my head. So... Green, stop typing.
I broke pens. She had a pain, and it had to be shared.
It was very painful.
It was very pain. Yeah, I don't know if there's too much else in this card besides the creepy factor of that. The card itself, it calls out that it is confirmed exotic, and going on in here that the AI has just absolutely confirmed that there is something exotic, not something it's familiar with going on at this point. So your threat detection level is kind of all over the place from 3 to 10, essentially. But I still think the funniest part of the threat detect is protocol and compliance is always 10.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well,
Firewall
and
has
that's why actually
no chill.
Yeah, well, I kind of read that as that's where I made a comment when I first started talking about it. I was like, I think 10 is low. It's stop it. No, stop it. It's basically the equivalent of God, just stop. Just
either it has no chill or it's the low end of the scale.
And it's just recording it because it's it's the AI part of it. It's you're not God, just stop. Just follow the rules.
Grim assessment. Josh, you said you had some more going on about this one that you felt like this one, to be honest, completely honest with listeners, I hate reading through Rasputin code and hate reading through the AI coding. I will do it and I break it apart like any other good lore person, but I hate it. So this is not me. You guys take this one.
I mean, when I didn't actually get a chance to do it, and I totally resonate with how you. When I looked at this, I was like, all right, I need to highlight in the same color repetitive phrases so that I can just get those out of the way. So threat response, cool. Every other line is going to start with that. That's relatively unimportant. These are cool. These suck to try and read. But I guess the whole purpose of this is to say Firewall and Rasputin are trying to calculate what mortality possibilities would come about in the future. And it seems to be all over the place, but it's also dependent on the type of threat that happens. So, he's got Firewall has an assessment for psychosis, has an assessment, but these are all sort of, I don't want to say they're random, but Firewall's only taking from what it knows has happened, and I don't think it, the exotic influence, 95%, and it's basically because the exotic, the Firewall doesn't know what that is. So this is also one of those moments, and with one of the later cards where yes, Firewall has a personality, but I'm not trying to get into the discussion of whether a machine can feel. But this is one of the first times where I'm thinking Firewall might be afraid.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, Firewall is part of Rasputin. Rasputin's main directive is to help sustain humanity, right? Like, that's one of the main directives that Rasputin has. So I don't know if the emotion aspect actually comes into it. It's more of the threat response. That's the first part of every one of these lines, right? Threat assessment, threat response, threat assessment. And then you have the reasoning, why that he's targeting: psychosis, exotic influence, efficacy assessment, veracity system shutdown, assessed, 4.7, 80s 2.0. I mean, there's also... Okay, Blue, I know you want to jump into that before we close up, I'm sure, but this one, you're getting multiple assessments based off of the possible threats, and it's almost like an equation of this is where we're heading. If I see this, this is the chance that this is going to happen. This is where we need to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Blue.
you see a change from threat assessment to threat response, threat assessment, threat response. So it's exactly that. It's an if-then format.
Then
It's like, hey, your quota exceeded this, so exotic influence was the cause. Your efficacy is this, so this is the cause. Medical is this, so this is the cause. And then at the end, you actually see, mortality assessment assessed is 0.5%, there's psychosis and all this. And it's actually because, and then one of the last ones is threat response plan. So this is the plan of it: mitigation, countermeasure, proceed, system-specific timekeeping dilation. The point here is that within the next entry, which is actually called time lapse, we actually see that Firewall has gone so far as to actually start manipulating the time stamps, or not the time stamps, but the clocks of the entire complex. And that is because they are only supposed to be exposed to the artifact for like 30 minutes. Well, they're continuously going over that exposure. They're overexposing themselves, and they're continuously deteriorating. And Firewall is like, okay, look, you aren't listening to me, so I'm just going to make it seem like you have been there for 40 minutes when you've actually only been there for 20. And he's that's to me, that's where you see Firewall being like, it's basically the equivalent of an AI throwing its hands in the air and like, look, you won't listen, so I'm going to have to actually change things to make you do this, what we know will actually supposedly help. It's really, that's kind of how I read that.
This is where English vocabulary helps. I didn't know what mendacity meant. So when I read that card, I'm thinking all of these people are having their own sort of time misunderstood because of their affliction from the article.
Mm-hmm.
So now that I know that, I'm like, oh, that makes not a lot more sense, but that definitely makes sense with what Firewall has been doing and will do in the subsequent cards.
Right.
So,
yeah, and I think that it's important too that last one is system specific timekeeping dilation, and that is really where he is, and you see that in time lapse. They're like, wait, what? It's been 3 hours, and it hasn't. Like, it's like, because it's the whole Space Odyssey thing. Everything is dependent on the AI to tell them what's going on. So when Firewall decides, I'm just going to have to actively shift your time and dilate your time so that it seems like it's longer, they don't have a frame of reference to disagree with it, because everything is connected to Firewall. So all the clocks are showing the same. Like, you're like, I think it's only been 5 minutes, and it's like, no, the clock says it's been 15. Well, what does this clock say? It's been 15. Like, he's completely he's manipulating. Which, two sides of that story. A, it's not going to help if they're also having active hallucinations, because that's a whole nother level of paranoia. But also, I see where Firewall's coming from. He's like, I've tried constantly to tell you people to stop doing this, and you just don't. So, like, here we go. Like,
Yeah.
and that's why when you read the very last ending, I'm like, I see the a lot of people how they are like, Firewall's like, no, you're gonna die, ha 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 ha, you know, like that whole like, I'm sorry, Dave thing. And I'm like, I personally don't read it that way. I read it as Firewall being, no, I'm not gonna let you have access to the artifact. You don't need it. You need to leave. You need to leave. Like, go away. Like, evacuate the base. And everyone's trying to get into that dig site, and he's like, no. Like, that's just like, this is the source of the problem, and you're addicted. Like, it's, you know, it's the AI equivalent of an intervention that ends horribly.
Well, okay, not to, you know, I know we're finishing up, so jump to that end. So that's oh my god, dig site 3, that is where the artifact is at the end
I
of
think
it?
so. Dig Site 3 was, hang on, let me make sure. So the artifact's no longer on any of the dig sites, right? Because it's been boxed up and moved to the lab.
Which is the Crucible map.
Correct. Yes. Dig Site. I'm trying to remember
Right,
if I
when
have.
so
Revelation.
when we get to
Yes.
down,
Revelation is where you have Waypoint 0. So it is at Waypoint 0, but the artifact is not there. But it's, again,
okay.
like, you also have on Revelation, you also have the research outpost, which is where, like, you have all the transceiver receptions and communion. So it's not at that same place, but this is like basically ground zero.
No, yeah, I'm just saying because, you know, you're talking about how they're trying to get the artifact, and that just wasn't what I was reading from down. At least from the last 3 cards, the last 3 emitting Uprising, where we have all of these separate events happening in all sectors that we know today, and they're basically 3 different groups of people dealing with the climax of everything that's been going on. And so in Downfall, I solely viewed that as an escape and not really something, more malicious, them trying to get the artifact.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, and that's where I kind of think I can see, like, I think that this is the AI not being able to extrapolate that there is some, like, I think the AI is reading this as, okay, you guys have snapped. And they're like, no, we're trying to get in the room to save ourselves. And he's like, no, I've told you this room's off. It's the whole thing of, like, you can't do this because I said so. Protocol in compliance. And they're like, no, the reason we're not listening to protocol is because we're about to die. And he's like, no, protocol in compliance, you can't do this. And it's like that AI, because, again, remember, Firewall is a submine, so it's the lack of maybe the nuanced computing there, because the threat response is error codes is what he's throwing in the header of Downfall. So, but I don't think that the intent of Firewall in Downfall is what I'm saying. I don't think the intent was to kill them. I think the intent was he was saying, no, your quota is exceeded. You are not allowed in here.
Oh, yeah. And I think just to, I guess, back to the intro episode, you know, with people not really knowing when this takes place in the timeline, I would say that the K1 incident is the sort of like the harbinger for the collapse. It's not the start of the collapse. It's not during the collapse, but it is, the collapse is coming, and this is the first sign of it. And I think sort of my argument to that would be the very last lines where Firewall in Downfall is saying psychosis, recent psychological trauma, existential collapse, and then one person stops, hears that, and is like, what does it mean by that? Which I assume is Dr. Smith. Maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on that, but and then Firewall ends it with the end of all things. And I think that's like, this is the prelude to the collapse.
To Kari White.
Yeah. Like, from here on out, events that follow in the timeline are going to be the lead up to the collapse as an event, with maybe, I guess, Krek and Mar being the literal, like, start. Like, this is the first of
this
the
is the
collapse.
first wave of it, and then I could see that. I definitely could see that. But our savior, green-eyed music lover.
A savior about what?
Oh, I looked over and that's the name that you've given yourself in chat. So
Yeah.
I was like,
well, I mean, that's my title now. I may have gone for this title just because I wanted to be called Savior. You know, it's fine. I don't have a hero complex. It's fine. I have no illusions of grandeur
she has not been exposed to an artifact.
that you know of.
Anyways, moving on. Kareen will save us all.
With my bow. Anyway. I don't, without going into too much detail on any of the other cards, because there's still a ton of stuff we could talk about, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should wrap this up because we've already hit quite a time bank on this one.
Yes.
And
I think everyone will be okay with it, but yes.
I think so too. If you want to dive into the last couple of cards, I highly suggest it and really focus on going into the coding, because you're going to get more of a story of what's going on with Firewall and what's actually happening through Firewall's perspective than you will through the participants on K1. Just FYI.
And also check out the Collector's Edition journal.
That too. It's really cool.
It has...
That last page.
Yeah, oh god.
That last page... Scared.
Yeah, there's a couple that are kind of creepy, but is that the one where she will?
Yeah, she will. X, Y, and Z. Oof.
Yeah. Yeah. That one. When you have nothing, you are capable of everything. Yeah. You got Ripley really fast. All right. Shoutouts. Josh, what do you got for us?
So, like I said, thank you guys. It's been getting a nice big psychology lesson from Blue in the middle of this episode.
You're welcome / sorry.
But no, yeah, thank you for bringing me back. Hope and look forward to next time. Also, this book was great. Kraken Mar was great. I expect from the Bungie writers, and maybe this is just me with some lore from D1 that I never had fulfilled. I want to see something like this in this same time period, either between Revelations and Kraken, just after Kraken. I want to see this with Freehold. I want to see this. I want to see this with Ishtar. And I want to see this with, is it Old Chicago?
Yes.
That was from way early in D1 concept. Like, I want to see it with places that we know or that we've heard and that we've seen. But that is, like in my head, that's lost lore. Freehold and the Desert of Giants or whatever. That's, like, I want to know what happened there. So, looking forward to that, hopefully with the next season as Destiny moves on. But, yeah, that's my shoutouts.
Shoutouts to, this is going to be kind of a tag onto that. Shoutouts to the writers and planting the seeds for something like this. This book came out at the beginning of Shadowkeep, and we have been sitting on it this entire time. Not really, we knew what was going on. We knew it tied into what was going on with Eris and the sites that we were on the moon, but the fact that some of these things are getting tied to what's coming in the near future is kind of a fun thing. And it's one of the things that keep you coming back to Destiny lore over and over again, because not only is it a mystery, you have just these tendrils that will make you want to dig into the next season because, hey, some of these things get answered, just like Josh was saying. And if we get more aspects of like Old Chicago would be cool, like getting into some of those places that we haven't had a whole lot of information on, or going back to Venus, like going into the libraries again. Just having all those things would be great. Blue, shout outs from you.
Big shout out to Matt Cernet again. Excellent job with this book. This tie-in with, John's work and Seth's work for the rest of the other pieces and the whole team's work. Amazing. I've been blown away by these past couple books that we've gotten to go through, as you might have known, since this one's now pushing over 2 hours. Sorry, not sorry. It was a blast to get to do research for this piece. And, thank you guys for sticking with it. It's been really fun, and I can't wait to hear the thought processes around this, especially with the new web lore that's coming out. Just love it. So as has become usual, thank you for your time. And until next time, remember, with wisdom we conquer. Stand strong, stand tall, and keep exploring. With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/FocusedFireChat. Links to all our episode archives can be found at www.thelorenetwork.com. Please be sure to email us at focusedfirechat@gmail.com with any comments and or questions for the team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes as well. So until next time, focus your fire and may your light shine bright.